Hello there, people of the internet. I'm out here with a couple of different rifles, but one of the rifles that I have is this right here. This is a 303 British #1 Mark III, but of course you can insert any of your 303 British firing rifles in this argument. Uh, one of the big things I hear in the military surplus market or military surplus community is people trying to justify different arguments for using a military surplus rifle in a modern day sort of situation. Like in the events that they needed to use something to protect themselves, or they needed to use something for, I don't know, insert your choice of a reason to use a military surplus rifle for defense, offense, pursuits of life and liberty, or defense of life and liberty. Like your choice, dealer's choice, viewer's choice. People try to justify all sorts of reasons for all sorts of things as to why it is that they would use these particular items. And the big issue with using these particular items is they absolutely do not stack up at all to what we have in the modern day. And I will hear people tell me, like whenever they try justifying the Mosin Nagant, and this is a public gun range, by the way, you're going to hear gunfire off in the distance. But whenever people try to justify using the Mosin Nagant, they tell me the ammunition's all over the place, it's used by militaries all over the world, you're always going to be able to find ammo for it. It's a 5-shot bolt-action rifle, but Simo Hire, whatever the White Death's name is, that guy was able to run around and take out a tremendous amount of Russians very, very easily, apparently, according to these guys, with his Mosin Nagant rifle. So if he can do it, then everyone else can do it as well. Well, in a modern day context, if you had somebody running around in the snow like that, he would be picked up on thermals and wiped out with artillery immediately. Like somebody like that, as soon as he fired his first, maybe second shot, you're in the wastelands, in the snow area. Like the camouflage that you're using for eyesight purposes. And yeah, somebody might not be able to see with their bare naked eyes, but if you're on a modern battlefield, there's a lot of people who aren't just using their bare naked eyes. In a modern day context, I don't care how good somebody was 100 years ago, 80 years ago, whatever the Winter War, Continuation War time era was in. I think it was about 80 years ago at this particular point. Wow, they're really going ham over there. How do you like that? But I don't care how good somebody was back then, there's going to be that limitation of modern technology. And even if we're looking at small arms, something like this right here was designed in the 1800s, actually. And it did see pretty good effective use and service in the early 1900s, but we're in the 2000s now. Like we're pushing about a quarter of the way through the 2000s, and we have the capabilities of producing some really good rifles for not a lot of money. I know if you want to go out and get yourself a #1 Mark III like what I have here, and you want to get yourself one that's in decent, usable shape, not just some crap that's been dug out of some warehouse somewhere in some other country, like, say, Ethiopia, then you're going to be spending, I don't know, $500 on something like this when everything is all said and done. Well, that $500 will get you a good variety of modern ARs, and the modern ARs have available ammunition. They have much more capability in terms of capacity, in terms of ergonomics. They're not manually operated, they're self-loading, semi-automatic rifles, so you don't have to cycle a bolt every time that you shoot it, not unless you're in some communist state, in which case that's not an AR, that's like a neutered platform made to look like an AR. But the big issue with the Enfield, although I am over here harping on it for its lack of capabilities in comparison to more modern day things, the big issue with it is the ammunition. And one of the things that I I don't want to use the word approve, but one of the things that I can say are a benefit of the rifle are the fact that it has external magazines, short bolt throw. You could fire this thing pretty gosh darn quickly with not a whole lot of invested time and effort into learning how to do so. So you could use this rifle quite effectively if you really practiced and knew what you were doing. But that being said, somebody with even a mediocre amount of training on a self-loading rifle would be able to keep up with you and your extreme proficiency of the Enfield series. But even with that proficiency of an Enfield, even with that proficiency in your bolt action rifle, whether you're going with a #1 Mark III, a #4 Mark I, or a Jungle Carbine, or take your pick. But with your extreme proficiency of that, that should be adequate enough to handle most situations, unless you're going up against like a modern equipped military force. But if you're using something like this for like defensive purposes, or for an SHTF rifle, or for a survival rifle, a hunting rifle, something like that, your 10 rounds of a quickly cycling bolt action rifle and your ability to be able to swap those magazines out with another magazine, if you happen to have another magazine with you, that should be adequate enough to be able to put down whatever threat it is that you're trying to put down, especially because most of your conflicts here in the United States are not resolved with rifles. They're resolved with something like a handgun. So odds are you're not even going to be using a rifle if something goes down. But if something does go down and you end up using and needing a rifle, the 10-shot, fairly quick firing nature of the Enfield is adequate enough to be able to handle most situations. It's not as good as modern stuff, I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination, but it is adequate enough, and that's one of the arguments that a lot of people make for the rifle. However, the big issue with the rifle is the ammunition, the .303 British cartridge. Now, if you have yourself like an Ishapore 2A1 and you actually have one that functions properly and the magazine's not absolute garbage on it, which most of those magazines are absolute garbage on those, then the 7.62 NATO Ishapore rifles are a different argument. But if you're using a .303 British Enfield series, Lee Enfield, then there's some issues with this ammunition. First off, you get rimlock. I know some people are going to say rimlock's a myth. Rimlock is not a myth. I've gotten rimlock in my rifles before. If you're using old school military surplus ammo that's like 80+ years old, some of them have like a little angle. It's called a chamfer, but not a lot of people know what a chamfer is here in the US. It's got a little angle that's been ground onto the rim of the cartridge, so you can just kind of push one rim past another. Well, if you're using it for defensive purposes, don't rely on 80-year-old ammunition. Go out and get yourself some modern production ammunition. Modern production ammunition does not have that little cutout, so you're not going to have that advantage, and you do risk getting rimlock, and I have gotten rimlock before. That being said, you can just kind of force your way through it. That's really not that big of a deal. The big issue with this ammunition is costing availability. Like, if this was 10-15 years ago, we would not be having this conversation. It was on par with all the other ammunition that was out there on the market. However, nowadays, .303 British has turned into something that is more difficult to find, and if you do find it, it's expensive. It typically runs like $1.50 a round. So unless your pockets are deep, and if they are deep, you can get a lot more .223 for that same amount of money that you're spending. Like, it just does not make sense to spend a bunch of money on .303 British, especially because the .303 British is so ridiculously similar to something like 7.62 NATO, which is like half the cost. If you want to use an Enfield rifle, you may as well get the Ishapore versus something like a .303. That being said, the Ishapores oftentimes have trouble running. I know I have an Ishapore, and I have played with several Ishapore rifles, and every single one of them just has trouble, and that's because they all got crappy magazines. That's just the nature of the design. Now, you can try and fix the magazines the best that you can, but they just never... They're never as smooth operating as the .303 British rifles. Fantastic rifles. I'm not over here trying to say that .303 British is not a good rifle. I am just saying that these right here are not a viable option in the modern day, simply because of availability and price point. If you're going to go out and get yourself... Actually, I got a box of 20 rounds right here of .303 British. I got those, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, for about $1 a round. Nowadays, I see those go for like 35 bucks a box for that box of 20. Well, you can get yourself a box of like, let's say 223. Let's just say off-the-shelf surplus 223, 55 or 62 grain, like the cheapest stuff that you can get. Well, if you go out and you get yourself some of that, it's going to cost you like $7 or $8 for that box of 20, depending on how much it is that you actually buy. So you got that $7 or $8 for that box of 20. Granted, it is a lower powered round, or you could go with 7.62 NATO. You go out and get yourself a box of surplus 7.62 NATO. That 20 round box of ammunition is going to cost you $12, $11. Definitely not the 30 something dollars that you'd spend on 303. Just the amount of money that you spend on the rifle and the ammunition could get you so much better options that are way more ergonomic, and that's one of the big arguing points that I have against using a 303 British rifle in whatever sort of situation it is that you're dealing with. Now, if you're one of the many people in my audience who already has the rifle and ammunition, and that's what you want to use, then dude, go for it. I don't have the ability to tell you what to do, and you're definitely not going to listen to me if I do try telling you what to do. But I'm saying if you have nothing and you're looking to go out and get yourself something, this would not be the best option. Okay, so speaking of 303, I have not fired 303 British in quite some time, so I'm going to go ahead and send a couple of rounds downrange here. I don't really have any targets set up, but that's not going to stop me from pulling the trigger. I'm going to go ahead, I got a box out there. I'm going to aim at the box, pull the trigger. I want to see where these 150 grain projectiles hit in comparison to where it is that I'm aiming. So I'm just going to aim at the center of the box, and we will see what happens here. Okay, by the looks of it, we hit right dead center. Sweet. So this right here seems to hit pretty gosh darn good with 150 grain projectiles. Now this stuff is reloadable, so I am saving my brass. If you are a hand loader, then reloading 303 British is definitely the way to go in comparison to just buying modern production. So I have another round right here. This right here is a rifle that you could fire quite fast if you had the skills for it. I don't have the skills for it. It's definitely something that requires a little bit of practice. So I'm just going to aim at something out there, pull the trigger, and we will see if it is destroyed and goes flying. Nice. Well, I hit that thing and it moved, but 303 British, these full metal jackets, that probably just went right through it. But I did fire a couple of rounds of 303 British for you guys, just because I'm out here on the range and there's no reason for me not to do so. So thanks for watching, folks. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and I guess I'll see you guys on the next episode. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.